I have with me today Dr. Wendy Pearson, Associate Professor at the University of Guelph, who has been conducting some interesting research on nutraceuticals to improve gastric health in horses. Welcome, Dr. Pearson.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Can you briefly describe how the research is progressing and what you're currently focusing on?
Well, we've now published 3 papers from this research, and kind of an overall kind of bird's eye view of it. Initially, what we wanted to do is look at G's formula in what we call in vitro models. So basically, these are models where we take cells and tissue. We typically use tissue from pigs that have been slaughtered for food. We're able to get gastric tissue. That's where we get the tissue from. And as long as we collect the tissue quickly after the animal has been slaughtered for meat, then the tissue is still viable, meaning that it still is able to behave in many ways as it would in the living animal. And so what we do is we take little pieces of tissue. The first study that we did, we wanted to see what effect G's formula had on gastric smooth muscle. So this is the muscle in the stomach that causes the stomach to contract and then move material through the stomach. And so what we were able to show is we had these little pieces of tissue attached to little recording devices that measure the contraction strength of the muscle. So what we wanted to see is, does G's formula actually increase contractility of this muscle, which would provide some evidence for why it is able to accelerate gastrointestinal transit and thereby potentially contribute to reduced incidences of colic. And so that first study, we found that there was actually a significant increase in contractility of that smooth muscle when the smooth muscle was exposed to the G's formula. So that was pretty cool. So the next step was then we wanted to look and see, well, what effect does G's formula have on hormones that regulate transit time in the gut? And so for that study, we took mucosa of the stomach, which is basically, it's the lining of the stomach that separates the smooth muscle portion from the actual lumen of the stomach or the contents of the stomach. And this mucosal portion is what is producing a lot of those hormones that regulate transit time in the gut. And so we took little pieces of this mucosa and we cultured it, which is harder than it sounds, by the way, but we were able to culture it successfully after many, many tries. And we were able to show that the mucosa, when it was cultured in the presence of the G's formula, actually produced more of a hormone called gastrin. And gastrin has a bunch of different roles in the stomach, depending on kind of where it's produced and a number of other factors. But in general, gastrin is increasing contractility of that sort of distal part of the stomach, which is that part of the stomach that pushes material out of the stomach and into the small intestine. So this matches up really nicely with the evidence that we had that G's formula was increasing the contractility of the smooth muscle. So because we had those 2 in vitro studies that gave us reason to predict that in a horse, G's formula would actually accelerate transit time, meaning that it would move digesta through the GI tract faster than if the diet didn't contain G's formula. And so for that live animal study, this one was fun. We were using a group of actively racing standardbred horses, and these horses were in active race training. So they were jogging every day. They were stabled in stalls 23 hours a day for the most part, except for when they were racing. They were on a very consistent diet through all of the horses were eating the same, with the exception that one group had G's formula at the regular maintenance dose, another group had 3 times the regular maintenance dose, and a third group had no G's formula at all. And when they were eating their food, one of the things that we did on study days is we actually, with a syringe, we dosed these horses with little tiny red beads. And actually they were fluorescent pink, if I'm being honest. And so the purpose of these beads was to act as a marker for how long it took the meal that the horse ate to actually arrive in the feces. And so I had all these wonderful, very hardworking little grad students collecting feces for 72 hours, every 2 hours. And we would put the feces in a big bucket, add hot water, and then eventually these little pink beads float to the top. And then the students would count the beads. I mean, being a grad student is very glamorous work. and and so that was the main thing, is we wanted to see, okay, are we having some effect on overall gastrointestinal transit? Because we could see we had some evidence for increase in transit in the stomach, but we wanted to know what happens on a whole GI tract level. And so among the other things that we were looking at, we were also looking at inflammatory biomarkers and some biomarkers that were specifically linked to horses that had a higher risk of colic. And so in the initial phase, we're looking at the beads, and we actually did not find an overall decrease in transit time in these horses. And the reason we think that happened is because these horses were under a very stressful kind of environment. And so they actually had already accelerated transit time compared with data that show what it should be under kind of sedentary conditions. So we think that that's why in this case we didn't see a decrease or a faster transit time. However, we did see a significant decrease in biomarkers in the blood that are associated with increasing risk of colic. So that right there gave us some pretty clear evidence that there is certainly a rationale for providing this this product to horses that are at risk of developing colic.
I understand your study involving standardbred racehorses found G's had an impact on the electrolyte profile of the horse. And what could this mean for high performance equine athletes?
Yeah, that was a really unexpected finding. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, actually, because we saw evidence of an alkalinizing effect of the G's formula, which basically means it, although it didn't have a direct effect on pH, it did affect the hormone, the electrolytes that contribute to changes in pH. So this could potentially be of benefit in that if you can slightly buffer the decline in pH that's associated with high intensity exercise, then you can prolong time to fatigue. So this potentially could be a beneficial thing for exercising horses. The flip side of that is that it also has the potential to increase your risk of a positive TCO2 test. Now, we didn't look at these things in this study. This was just an accidental finding. So that was certainly, when we were writing the paper, that was something that we had recommended be followed up in future research, is to kind of get at this kind of alkalinizing effect that we saw, to see if that's reproducible in a second study, but also what the implications are of that on time to fatigue in exercising horses.
Now, this isn't your first rodeo when it comes to research on supplements. Can you tell us what the hallmarks are of a supplement backed by good research?
I want to start by saying that, this industry is getting better. Okay. When we talk about back in 1997, when I ran my first trial, we had absolutely no regulations to be able to deal with the particular characteristics of nutraceutical products. So we've come a long way. Right. So from a regulatory perspective, we now have oversight from Health Canada that we didn't have back in 1997. That said, the paradigm that these companies are operating in still doesn't demand efficacy research. And that's a big problem, because a lot of the research that's used to kind of scientifically back products, most of the time, and I'm going to say that again, most of the time, it's not on the actual product. It's on research that maybe other companies have done on similar products, or what science geeks like me maybe have done on individual ingredients. But in many cases, it's not on the actual complex products. So without that good research, you have no idea what the species-specific effects are on horses. You have no idea what the interactions may be between these different ingredients, and you have almost no idea what the dose should be. right? So these are really important questions for which we don't have the answers for the vast majority of nutraceutical supplements for horses. So when you find companies like G's Formula, and I mean, there are other companies that I've worked with over the years that have made a very profound investment in researching their products. Those are the products for which you can have pretty good confidence that they're going to do what the label says they're going to do, because the company's not going to invest the substantial investment that's required to get good objective third-party research if they're not going to use that research to ethically market the product, right? So for those people who are out there buying supplements for horses, that's one of the first things that I recommend is support these companies that are doing it the hard way, right? They're the ones that are going out there. They're putting their money and their risk where their mouth is. And these are the companies that are coming out with verifiable evidence-based data for using the product in horses.
Well, thanks for sharing your knowledge with us, Dr. Pearson.